In a courtroom heavy with anticipation, Sarah Mitchell stood before the judge, her heart pounding as the moment of her verdict approached. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settles over a room when lives hang in the balance. She was asked to remove her jacket, a routine request to ensure no hidden items disrupted the proceedings. As the fabric slipped from her shoulders, a tattoo on her arm came into view, a small, intricate design that seemed unremarkable to most. But the judge, a man known for his unshakable composure, froze. His eyes locked onto the ink, and for a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. What was it about that tattoo that stopped him cold, unraveling a story no one could have anticipated? Sarah Mitchell stood quietly in the defendant's box, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was 32, a woman of average height with dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her face, though pale from sleepless nights, carried a quiet resolve. She had been in this courtroom for weeks, facing charges of embezzlement from her former employer, a mid-sized accounting firm in Portland. The case had been straightforward at first. Allegations of siphoned funds, falsified records, and a paper trail that seemed to point directly to her. But as the trial unfolded, cracks in the prosecution's case had begun to show. Sarah's defense attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Karen Wells, had poked holes in the evidence, arguing that Sarah had been framed by someone within the company. The jury was now deliberating, and the moment of truth was near. The judge, Honorable Raymond Carter, presided over the courtroom with a presence that commanded respect. At 58, he was a veteran of the bench, known for his meticulous attention to detail and an almost mechanical adherence to procedure. His gray hair was neatly combed, his robes immaculate, and his expression rarely betrayed emotion. He had seen it all: fraud, theft, betrayal, and nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. As the jury filed back into the room, the bailiff approached Sarah. "Ma'am, please remove your jacket," he said, his tone professional but firm. It was standard protocol in some courtrooms, a precaution to ensure no one carried concealed items or wore anything that could influence the proceedings. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her fingers lingering on the zipper of her navy blazer. She wasn't expecting this, but she complied, sliding the jacket off her shoulders and handing it to the bailiff. Her blouse was sleeveless, and as she turned to face the judge, a small tattoo on her upper right arm became visible. It was a delicate design, a crescent moon entwined with a single rose, no larger than a silver dollar. To most, it was just a piece of body art, unremarkable in a world where tattoos were common. But to Judge Carter, it was something else entirely. His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, but enough for those closest to him to notice. His pen, which had been tapping rhythmically against his notes, stopped mid-motion. The courtroom, already quiet, seemed to grow quieter still, as if the air itself had thickened. Sarah didn't notice the judge's reaction at first. She was too focused on the jury, her stomach twisting with nerves. But Karen, her attorney, caught the shift in Carter's demeanor. She leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowing. Something was off. Judge Carter cleared his throat, regaining his composure almost instantly. "Proceed," he said, his voice steady but a touch quieter than usual. The jury foreman stood, holding a folded piece of paper. "We, the jury, find the defendant Sarah Mitchell not guilty on all counts," he announced. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. Karen gripped her hand, whispering, "You did it." But Sarah's eyes drifted to the judge, who was staring not at the jury, but at her arm. His face was unreadable now, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. As the courtroom began to clear, Carter remained seated, his gaze lingering on Sarah. He didn't move until the bailiff approached, asking if he needed anything. "No," Carter said quickly, standing and gathering his papers. But his mind was elsewhere, racing back to a moment he had buried long ago. 25 years earlier, Raymond Carter hadn't been a judge. He was a young lawyer, fresh out of law school, working pro bono cases in a small legal aid clinic in Seattle. It was there he met Emily, a woman whose face he could still recall with startling clarity. She was 22, a single mother struggling to keep custody of her infant daughter after a messy divorce. Emily's ex-husband, a man with a volatile temper and a knack for manipulation, had accused her of neglect, claiming she was unfit to raise their child. Carter took her case, driven by a mix of idealism and a quiet attraction to Emily's resilience. She was fierce, determined, and carried a quiet strength that made her stand out in a world that seemed determined to break her. Emily had a tattoo, a crescent moon entwined with a rose, inked on her upper right arm. She'd gotten it after her daughter was born, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Carter remembered the day she showed it to him, pulling up her sleeve in the cramped office of the clinic. "It's for her," she'd said, her voice soft but unwavering. "To remind me why I keep fighting." Carter had nodded, struck by the simplicity of the gesture. He didn't know then that the image would stay with him, a quiet marker of a case that would change him. The custody battle was brutal. Emily's ex-husband had money and a team of lawyers who painted her as unstable, using her past struggles with depression against her. Carter fought hard, but the system was unforgiving. In the end, Emily lost custody. The judge's ruling was final. Her daughter would go to her ex-husband, who had since moved across the country. Emily was devastated, and Carter, still green and unaccustomed to the weight of failure, felt it too. He saw her one last time outside the courthouse, her eyes red but dry, her tattoo peeking out from beneath her jacket. "Thank you for trying," she said, her voice hollow. Then she walked away, and he never saw her again. Carter threw himself into his career after that, climbing the ranks from lawyer to judge, building a reputation for fairness and precision. But Emily's case lingered, a quiet scar on his conscience. He often wondered what had become of her and her daughter, a girl whose name he could no longer recall. Over time, the memory faded, buried beneath years of cases and rulings. Till now. Back in the present, Sarah Mitchell gathered her things, her mind still reeling from the not guilty verdict. She thanked Karen, who was already talking about next steps, about clearing her record and moving forward. But Sarah's thoughts were scattered. She hadn't missed the judge's reaction, though she couldn't place why it unsettled her. She didn't know Judge Carter, had never met him before this trial. Yet there was something in his eyes, something that felt personal. As she left the courtroom, Sarah didn't notice the man watching her from the back of the room. He was older, in his late 60s, with a weathered face and a cheap suit that hung loosely on his frame. He had been there every day of the trial, sitting quietly, unnoticed by most. His name was Daniel Harper, and he knew more about Sarah's story than she realized. Daniel had been Emily's ex-husband, the man who had taken her daughter all those years ago. He had raised the girl, whose name was Sarah, far from her mother's reach. Daniel was not a good man. He knew that much. His temper had softened with age, but the guilt of what he'd done to Emily had never left him. He had followed Sarah's life from a distance, watching as she grew into a woman who looked so much like her mother it sometimes hurt to see her. When he heard about her arrest, he came to the trial, not to gloat or interfere, but to see if the daughter he had barely known had inherited her mother's strength. Daniel had noticed the tattoo on Sarah's arm the first day she wore a short-sleeved blouse in court. He recognized it immediately, the same crescent moon and rose that Emily had worn. Sarah had gotten it when she was 18, after finding an old photo of her mother tucked away in a box of her father's things. The photo was grainy, but the tattoo was clear, and Sarah had felt a connection to the mother she barely remembered. She didn't know the full story of Emily's life or loss, only fragments pieced together from her father's reluctant admissions. But the tattoo was her way of holding on to something she had lost. Judge Carter sat in his chambers after the courtroom emptied, his hands folded on his desk. The image of Sarah's tattoo was burned into his mind, pulling him back to Emily. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? He had seen thousands of tattoos in his years on the bench, but none had ever stopped him like this. He opened his laptop, hesitating before typing Emily's name into the court's database. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Closure, perhaps, or confirmation that the past wasn't as connected to the present as he feared. The search yielded little. Emily Harper had disappeared from public records after the custody case. There were no recent addresses, no death certificate, no trace of her after 2001. Carter leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Was Sarah Mitchell the daughter Emily had lost? The timing fit. Sarah was about the right age. But the tattoo? It was too specific, too personal. He needed to know more. Carter called his clerk, a young man named Ethan who had a knack for digging up information. "I need you to look into someone," Carter said, keeping his tone neutral. "Sarah Mitchell, the defendant from today's case. Find out about her background. Family, parents, anything you can get." Ethan nodded, used to the judge's occasional requests for research, though he noted the unusual intensity in Carter's voice. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to move on. The verdict had cleared her name, but the weight of the trial lingered. She returned to her small apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet part of town, and tried to focus on rebuilding her life. The job she'd lost at the accounting firm was gone for good, but Karen had connected her with a friend who ran a non-profit, and there was a possibility of work there. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. The judge's reaction gnawed at her, though she couldn't say why. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper sat in a diner across town, nursing a coffee and staring at a photo on his phone. It was the same photo Sarah had found years ago. Emily, smiling faintly, her tattoo visible in the sunlight. Daniel had kept it all these years, a reminder of the woman he had wronged. He hadn't spoken to Sarah since she was a child, and she didn't know he had been at the trial. He wasn't sure what he wanted, to apologize, to explain, or simply to know that she was okay. But seeing her in that courtroom, standing tall despite the accusations, had stirred something in him. She was Emily's daughter through and through. Ethan, the judge's clerk, worked quickly. By the end of the week, he had a file on Sarah Mitchell. She was born in Seattle, raised by her father, Daniel Harper, after a custody battle in 2000. Her mother, Emily Harper, had been deemed unfit by the court and lost all parental rights. The file noted Emily's last known address, a low-income housing complex, but there was no record of her after that. Sarah had no criminal history prior to the embezzlement charge, and her background was unremarkable. High school, community college, a steady job until the accusations derailed her life. Ethan handed the file to Carter, who read it in silence. The name Emily Harper hit Carter like a punch. He remembered every detail of her case now, the way she had fought, the way the system had failed her. Sarah was her daughter, and the tattoo was no coincidence. It was a link to a past Carter had never fully let go of. But what did it mean? Why had Sarah been in his courtroom, facing charges that didn't quite add up? And why did the sight of that tattoo feel like a message from Emily herself? Carter couldn't let it rest. Against his better judgment, he decided to reach out to Sarah. He knew it was improper. A judge contacting a former defendant could raise questions, but he needed answers. He asked Ethan to arrange a meeting, framing it as a follow-up on the case. Ethan, sensing there was more to the story, didn't ask questions.